design. So what I'll do is I will give a short presentation today about some of the theories around socially responsible design. Tomorrow I will be doing a workshop activity with you around some of the design process, human-centered design processes that you can use. So we will do an activity tomorrow, and I will also talk to you tomorrow more about a case study project that I have done with some artisans in India with students in Melbourne, and how designers in Australia or design students in Australia might work with artisans and craftspeople in India. So that will be for tomorrow. Today I more wanted to talk about social responsibility, and I think this leads in very well from Professor Gupta's very passionate lecture this morning. So you have to remember that generally what I am teaching to my students is industrial design. So it is about industrial design, which is very much commercially orientated work, where design is very separate from making things. It really is not so much about people or solving problems, it's much more about selling more product. So that is really traditionally where industrial design has come from. Industrial design in the West really did not exist until around the 1950s, when in the US, people decided that they needed to sell more products to make more money and to stimulate the economy. So they invented an idea where designers could create new products all the time that people would want all the time, and therefore we would have consumerism. So really, it is the designer's fault that we have consumerism, and now we kind of have this really massive problem in terms of the environment. I guess in contrast to that, socially responsible design is design that's considered good for people and good for the environment. So it's much more than just eco-design and sustainability. It is much more than just focusing on the user and the human-centered design. So if you remember, or if you think about in your projects, the problem that I'm solving, it must be good for people, it must also be good for the environment. So again, Professor Gupta was speaking about this idea of circularity, that we're trying to have a closed loop in our materials, is a really pivotal, I think, idea in part of our socially responsible agenda to work as designers. The sustainable design movement has really been around for quite a long time. The triple bottom line is called the simultaneous pursuit of economic prosperity, environmental quality, and most importantly, social equity. So any sort of socially responsible design outcome should have this mix of being economically appropriate, so that we all know that we cannot live without money in some sense. As much as we would like to not have any monetary involvement, we kind of need to have this economic sustainability. But that we should also be looking for environmental quality and social equity, so that everybody has access to this money and that everybody has a right to live in a clean environment. As I said, design professionals, particularly industrial design, has been very well equipped to work for design for business. I think industrial designers the world over are very good at creating new products, in understanding new markets, in making people buy more things, but traditionally they have not been so good at design for environments. So really not considering the circularity idea, and also have not been very good at design for society. So they haven't really thought a lot, in the West particularly, about designing for people that are not so fortunate as others. In terms of sustainability, and I should say this is a koala from Australia, in case you don't know. Some people say koala bear. It's not a bear, it's just a koala. But a koala is an icon of Australian animal, but it is very endangered. Its environment has been so depleted. They have chopped down the trees that these animals eat. So they're very dwindling, small, very endangered species. So I put this slide because I wanted to highlight the idea that in the Western context, our current rates of consumption and pollution is unsustainable. The world can only cope with so much pollution that you can actually reuse and reinvent, and the world can accommodate. So we need to really start thinking about the Earth's natural systems and try and work more with our stocks of natural capital, because it is a finite system. The world only has a certain amount of resources. The idea that we can continue to dig coal out of the ground or pull oil from the depths of the earth, these are finite resources. We will run out. I've seen statistics that in the US, the normal person uses 5 times the amount of resources that the world could really sustain for the future. So I think that this comes back to this idea that socially responsible design is about thinking about good for the people and good for the planet. In terms of industrial design, 80% of the environmental impact is determined at the design stage. So this really highlights the importance of the designer getting the problem right and the designer thinking about the whole system of the product. But again, this idea of circularity, the life cycle of the product, the impacts of the product, what are all the things that happen along the product's life cycle. So whether that is gaining the raw materials, whether that is the factory blowing out smoke, whether that is shipping the product vast distances, so you use a lot of petrol, whether that is a lot of waste in the packaging, so there is more packaging than is needed, or whether the product uses a lot of energy in its use phase, so it's very high energy use. We need to be thinking about all these system aspects of any product that we design. So in the past, design has been clearly aligned with this idea of producing, selling and consuming, particularly in the West and particularly in the US and in countries like Australia and the UK. But many theorists are asking, is there more than this codependency between design and business? So design should have this responsibility to the environment and to people. So can socially responsible design help societies change to address this complex challenge of more sustainable ways of living and working? Because I think we have all come on this consumerist bandwagon where we want to buy more things, we want to upgrade our cell phone, we want the latest thing because advertising tells us we should. But I think many theorists are saying there is a lot more that design can offer than just new products. Many theorists say that design can serve the needs of business, but can also treat society and the environment as clients too. So thinking of them in that professional capacity, respecting your end user, observing them as a client can be a way of creating socially responsible design. So unlike this traditional consumer-driven, consumerist, market-driven approach aimed at producing solutions for a global market, a socially responsible approach is targeted to local contexts. So, like Professor Gupta was saying, that a lot of solutions will work in only one particular place. You can't have a global solution that will work for everyone. With my students, I use a model that takes this idea of the triple bottom line, so the social, the economic, the environment, and I ask my students to look at the problem in respect to these 4 areas. So we look at the socio-cultural aspects. So what are the belief systems that the people, the problem that we have, what are the belief systems of those users? What are the cultural constraints within that? In the technosphere, is the technology what's called appropriate technology? That is technology that can be understood, maintained and used by that local community. If there is an economic aspect, is there a way for earning an income? So here, I guess I need the symbol for rupees, I have the symbol for dollars in Australia, but it is this idea that the solution should be something that is affordable or that it empowers people to make a living or a business from that solution. And of course we have the environmental realms, so sourcing local materials and thinking of the processing impacts, or whether these are recycled materials or upcycled materials, where you take something that is seen as waste and then you make it into something value added. These are the 4 kinds of aspects that I use with my students when we are looking at socially responsible projects. Many authors write about user-centered design and the types of aspects that you can understand about any user. So we have the user in the centre, and we need to understand their physical aspects, their physiological, so their health, their mental, the way that they understand the world, so their psychological aspects, the social network, the spiritual aspects of people's lives, the emotional connections that people have with activities or within family, for example, the local environment, and the personal finances. So these are all elements that when you are to design for someone else, you kind of need to have this knowledge about them. So it's not just about imagining that they will be the same as you. It's about thinking, what are all the aspects that make that person? And we will do a little bit of an activity around human-centered design tomorrow. So within this, we can see that we have the individual well-being in the centre. We have the socio-cultural well-being, which is kind of a collective well-being that Professor Gupta spoke of this morning. We have environmental well-being and economic well-being that intersect with the individual. In terms of understanding people, you will find that people are very complex. It is impossible to really know a person, because to really know in depth a person, you need to understand their past, their present, and their kind of dreams for the future. And I think that was, when I saw the children yesterday, what I really felt was they were able to have dreams for the future. And I found that very inspiring, because those children could see aspects in the environments that they went to where they really could see a future that was quite different. They seemed to have no problem imagining. They have no constraints. Whereas perhaps as an engineer or a professional designer, we would say, no, we couldn't possibly do that. That would be too hard. whereas the joy of the children is to see that vision, and once you have that vision as the designer, you can make it work. But it's about having the vision that's the important part. So in terms of understanding our user, you have done the field work, you can do surveys and interviews, but often people will not necessarily tell you, they might tell you what they think you want to hear, not necessarily what the real problem is. You can make observations of people, which can be really a valuable tool, and I think that's what I see from the field work that you have already done, that the children really made very insightful observations, and that is a real strength that you have with this summer school. But I think one of the really important aspects is to develop empathy with your user. So try to imagine yourself as the broom maker or the potter. What is your daily life? What is important to you? What difficulties do you have in your life? And really, that is a real depth of knowledge that it takes to have empathy with someone who is not entirely like yourself at all. Or maybe they are. You will often find that people are very similar to yourself once you get to those layers of knowledge. So there are very many different ways to know people. So there is what people say or think, there is what people do or use, and then there is this things that people know, feel and dream, and kind of the deep knowledge that you really need to develop with your user through conversation, etc., so that you can really get to understand their true desires and wishes. You can use techniques such as interviews or observations, or what are called generative sessions. So a generative session is where you might work with your user to do drawings or to make artifacts or to show them your designs, and you actually interact. It's like their ideas coming into your work. But the real skill with that is to be able to communicate your ideas. So whether that be a drawing, whether that be a paper model. A really great example from the children yesterday, I thought, was the child who made the asphalt making. He had a trolley and he showed how the tool would move the trolley. It was really great to see that, and I could understand, even though I couldn't understand what he was saying, I could understand through his actions and his demonstration of that model, the problems he was dealing with and the problems that he was solving. So, user-centered design is a really well-known and well-developed strategy that is applied not only to socially responsible design, but is also used in a commercial context. And so what it requires is there are three elements to user-centered design, and you can go to the user-centered design toolkit, which comes out of IDEO. And they say there are three things that you need to make a successful user-centered design. The first is that it needs to be desirable. So really, what do people desire? This is the idea of dreams, not just the immediate solution. What do they desire? The immediate solution for the potters may be that they want to use a sieve to have cleaner material, but really maybe what they desire is to make more pots to sell, to have a bigger income. Maybe that is the real objective. Maybe it is not just the clean clay will be a way to achieve that objective. So understanding those real desires. Feasibility. So what is technically and organisationally feasible? So this is looking at things like affordability, looking at the technological capabilities of people. Can they understand how to use these objects? Do they want to use these objects? And do they really have the understanding of how to maintain these objects? And the final part of the user-centered is the viability. So is the project going to be really viable? Not only do people want it, can they afford it? Do they need finance to purchase it? How viable is it going to be? So these are kind of the three stages. Understanding what people want, understanding what is technically possible in that scenario, and then finally what can be financially viable. In terms of a design process, this can kind of translate into a pre-designed kind of phase where you empathize with your user, where you might do some interviews and observations, and it feels like this is kind of the stage that you are in now with your project. It's very early. You have some ideas about what needs to be done, but there is still a much longer journey to take. You might develop some insights about the needs, desires, the dreams of these users, and you might use some generative process like a sacrificial concept, which I will talk about tomorrow. We'll try and do a little exercise around that. And you will develop deeper understanding about the problem by kind of co-solving the problem using these really generative research techniques. The second stage of the design process would be about developing a point of view or a design brief where you kind of narrow the problem to a statement about how you can solve it. So that is a really important part of the process, because until you know what the problem might be that you're trying to solve, it's very hard to have a creative solution. Tomorrow we will do some creativity exercises. So how many people here are from design or engineering? There's not so many. So it doesn't mean you haven't done creative thinking things before if you're not from that background, but we will do some exercises around creative problem solving tomorrow. And the second part of the design process here is to think about idea generation and also the notion of prototyping. So I think testing and prototyping is a really great way to solve your problem. So I think the example this morning with the sugarcane juicer and the ability, the testing that has gone in to say that it still could be improved, but the testing proves that it works, that people want to use it, and it's really now the problem has become how will it go, how will it attach to other machines, what range of machines, so there's still more development to go, but you've proved the main idea. So prototyping can be not just seen as getting the final solution, prototyping should be seen as part of the process of testing and solving the problem. It's not necessarily the end. Often the prototype doesn't work and it can be the beginning of the problem again. And I think proof of concept too can be around looking at the user needs and matching those to the product or solution's function. So even though I might be saying product, maybe some of these problems that I saw yesterday were not about products, they were about services. So the idea of education might be a service that happens in a particular place, and there might be a bus that delivers that service, but really the main problem solving is the service, not the bus. So you can use any old bus to translate or transfer people there, but really the problem solving is in the process. I think I've spoken about appropriate technologies, but this is really appropriate technologies are low capital costs, they use local labour and they create jobs, and they are controlled by local people and are appropriate to their needs. So really always thinking about this idea of a local context. So you should try and be sourcing the materials, the skills, the knowledge from that local area that you have. And as we saw yesterday, many So there's a lot of brain power to draw on there. In Western context, people have defined socially responsible design as much more than just an immediate product system service solution. So this is from an author called Davey, and they have proposed that in fact socially responsible design covers areas such as government determining policy. It covers areas such as fair trade. You know the term fair trade here, yeah? So making sure that people are paid equitably for the work that they do. That socially responsible design should work with ecology, so reducing pollution, and the development of green technologies like improving the efficiency of solar power, etc. That socially responsible design works on social inclusion, not exclusion, so this idea of equity and reducing discrimination. That socially responsible design is about access to healthcare and improving patients' experience in hospitals and navigating through healthcare professionals. And of course, we have finally education and then crime prevention. The prevention of crime could also be a socially responsible design problem. Delft University have done many projects which they call the bottom of the pyramid. And here are a few of the main areas that they think we should focus upon. The first one is education, because they see that education allows people to make informed choices, to have a public voice, and to be able to be good earners. And when women are educated, they can make good choices for their family. And I think we had a very long discussion about that this morning. Healthcare. The differences in healthcare standards vary very dramatically between rich and poor countries. So life expectancy varies between 85 and 36 years. So that's a lot of life difference. So healthcare, whether that means prevention of disease instead of trying to cure disease, but really healthcare is an incredible issue worldwide. Food security means access to a steady and reliable, sufficient quality and quantity of food. So food and nutrition is a very compelling project theme to work through. So even thinking around with some of these projects, the byproducts of food like rice husks, etc. can be used for other things. So again, this idea of circularity and also increasing the yields of foods like the threshing of the rice, etc. I think we had a long talk about water, and I think in parallel with water we have sanitation. So as much as 60% of the world's illnesses is water related. It's an enormous issue. Energy. The global requirements of energy are rapidly growing, yet we still often are compelled to rely on fossil fuels. So again, that's a finite resource. We need to be looking elsewhere. Housing and urbanisation. Some 1.2 billion people worldwide live on the equivalent of less than $1 a day, and it's estimated that 35 million new housing units are required each year in developing countries to accommodate the growth in the number of households. So 1 billion people now live in informal housing, and that's probably bigger than that now. This is a couple of years ago, this statistic. But there is some good news that there is a lot of natural, renewable raw materials that often poor communities have abundant raw materials, and they have access to these raw materials that can not only reduce the environmental load of a product, but also can form the economic basis of a business. So there are lots of opportunities. It's about being resourceful, having some information, and looking to find those opportunities. And technology and connectivity is enormous. I think there is how many mobile phones are there in India? Someone told me 400 million.
It's double. It's 800 million now. I mean, double.
800 million.
Yeah.
It's doubled in the last 2 years.
Last 3 years.
800 million mobile phones. So people are connected. So that gives people a way to sell their products. That gives people a way to get information. This is the whole idea around education is amazing with our new technologies. So even though you might say, well, how would a broom maker use, a broom maker may have a mobile phone, yeah? So there is a untapped resource of internet connectivity out there. What I think will be really challenging for you will be that once you have your project and you found the problem, is thinking about how people may need to change their behaviour to actually adopt your project. So yesterday there was an idea around sorting the rubbish. I think it was separating out the plastic, the organic waste, etc. Great idea, but how are you going to get people to do that? So the behaviour change part will be really challenging. There's a few models in the West around behaviour change. And one of these is called the ISM model. So it involves the individual, the social, and the material. And you start to investigate when you are actually observing your users. We've talked about the individual, so it's their values, their attitudes, their skills. We've talked about that in human-centered design. I think we can all understand the people. The other aspect is to look at the social. So what are the factors beyond the individual, the social norms, the meanings attached to activities, the cultural boundaries and restrictions? And I think Professor Gupta was talking about that this morning, that there are so many cultural relations that one needs to understand and restrictions that restrict our thinking as well. That we think we couldn't make a bridge out of roots because, wow, that would be too hard. But by having the mindset that you can actually do it, that means you can solve that problem in that new way. So we have individual constraints, we have social constraints, and then we have material constraints. So even material constraints can be things like government rules and regulations. Even though they're not a physical thing, they are definitely a constraint. And even time schedules are a definite constraint. And I would say in India, probably the weather would be a definite constraint, particularly this summer. It's so hot. There's certain things you can't do in the hot. There's certain things that you can't do in the rain. So the weather can really even seen as a material constraint. So the ISM model comes out of Scotland. I guess their weather is just cold, so it's the weather they don't count so much. But I think that it's a really interesting model, and I have used this with my students where we did a project about climate change and how we could get other people to have less impact, so less environmental impact. So my students went out and observed predominantly other students on campus and identified problems where there was a big sustainable impact. So they found things like takeaway food. In Australia, everybody buys their food in takeaway plastic container, and then all ends up just sort of in the rubbish bin, not even separated out. Even though there's a recycling bin, normal bin, people don't put in the recycling bin. So they looked at why don't people either bring their own lunch, or why do people just buy recycled in plastic containers? Because there's no choice. When you go to the shop, they just give you plastic container and you don't have any choice. So they said, okay, part of this problem is that people want to take away lunch. But the other part of the problem is there is only one option for your container. What if we design a reusable container and we design a system that when you buy your sandwich is on a plate and there's someone to collect that plate? Seems a very obvious solution. But really they come to this by saying if we need to have not only the university to agree, we need to find some cleaning people to come and do it, we need to get the shop people to agree, we need to get the government to say this is hygienic enough to agree. So there's all this system that happens around this whole project, and I think that is this sort of model of thinking about the individual, the social and the material can be a really good one for a lot of different projects. And I think that social impact also requires this behaviour change. So 3 sort of elements that you can think about in determining behaviour change are that there will be barriers to changing your behaviour. There is always barriers to anybody changing their behaviour. There will be triggers that will enable people to see the benefits of something, and then there needs to be motivators or incentives for people to change. Because people have habits and they don't want to change those habits, even though they might see the benefits of being really good. So an example of this is in Australia, in Melbourne, which is generally a very wet place. It's quite cool climate. We had a drought, so we had not enough water. So we had a drought for 10 years. And finally the government came and said, okay, everyone has to use less water because we can't, our water storage is down to 30% of capacity. It's really low. And what they did was they found they had to put some rules. It became, you couldn't water your garden. You could only water your garden every second day, depending if your house number was odd or even. So that immediately they halved the amount of water people did in the garden. Then they said, okay, you're not allowed to wash your car. You can't wash your car. I think you're lucky to have a car. You can't wash your car with a hose. You have to go to the car wash, official car wash, where they recycle all that water. And then they said, okay, this isn't working. Still, people are using too much water. And so they said, okay, they did a big advertising campaign. You should only have your shower for 1 minute. And so they sell a timer and they have a big advertising campaign. Only have your shower for 1 minute. And then also you put a bucket in the shower and then you can water your garden with the bucket. Okay? So this is a massive behaviour change for people. I'm not used to having a big heavy bucket. And then they said, okay, when you use your washing machine, you should capture the water from the washing machine, put it in a bucket, walk outside, water your garden. Oh, this seems like big change for me. What they found was that, I think in the 1980s, average person in Australia, you will fall over when you hear this number, they use 300 litres of water per day. 300 litres. Imagine if you had to carry 300 litres. I just turned the tap, okay? 300 litres per day. After they do this campaign where they have the government says, no, you can't water your garden, no, you can't wash your car, you should have 1 minute shower, you should use a bucket. They got down to 150 litres. So they halved the water consumption. That's not a new product. Yes, we could buy more water efficient washing machine. Yes, we could do this, but really it was people's behaviour that made that change. So really now I think because the drought finished, as soon as everyone sees it was raining, back up again. Much less buckets. But it was really interesting that you can, with some incentive, well partly the government saying I will give you a big fine if you use more water. If I see you washing your car, you'll be in big trouble. But also advertising campaign to say you will be a good person if you use less water. And suddenly it became socially the normal thing to do, to have a bucket in your shower. Suddenly everyone would talk about, wow, you know, I haven't had had to water my garden at all this week because I just used the bucket from the shower. It became really like pride. Everyone was so proud that they could use very little water. So this is a great thing about behaviour change, but we need an incentive to do that. I guess the incentive is the government, but also the community being very proud to save water. So I think Professor Gupta talked a lot about social impact, and he talked about thinking about the kind of other externality. What happens from your behaviour, your product, what are the impacts outside that? And with my students, I really try to get them to think about not only the product or the system that they are designing and the problem, but also to think about those external things that might happen from making that behaviour change, because some of those things might not be positive. So in the example with the water, you can imagine that a lot of people's gardens they were used to having lots of water, they all died. So a lot of people then suddenly had no garden. So that means that there is a negative kind of impact on your life, because you look out the window and it's not so green and beautiful anymore. But what it did too was people then realised that they needed to grow plants that were suitable for the Australian environment. So many people in Melbourne particularly have a garden that is like an English garden. So it has plants that have come from England. They're not used to the hot sun, they like cold weather, but they need a lot of water. They are really not the right plants to be growing in a very dry place. So another change, I guess, that happened after all the plants died was that people started to think more about their environment and to think about their local environment and to plant plants that actually belong there, not plants that come from somewhere else and they don't work so well. I'm just about at the end. So the second idea around the model of thinking about the person in the centre and thinking about the technosphere, thinking about the economy, thinking about the culture, is to look for social innovations. And Ezio Manzini is a very famous Italian theorist, and he runs a network called Design for Social Innovation and Sustainability, ADESIS, and I think there is actually maybe ADESIS at NID here in Ahmedabad as well. And what Ezio Manzini says is that we shouldn't, as designers, just transplant our product and say, there you go, there's the solution. What he says is you should look in communities and see what people are already doing. So instead of the designer coming with a solution and saying, you must do this, is you look at what people are already doing, how they do things. There are creative minds in that community that are solving problems. And you can then use design to help their solution be stronger. So I think that this is very much aligned to this idea of grassroots innovation. So instead of designer being the saviour, the designer will fix the problem, I think it is about using design to see what people are already doing and how design can actually make that solution better. So the example with the sugarcane that we saw today is kind of like that. So there is an existing thing there. Probably other people have tried to put a big curve at the back and try and change the way that machine works. I think one of the examples from yesterday was the idea of where the women could teach tailoring within the house. So you teach one person and then that person can teach another person. It's a social thing that's already happening, but if you can design a way, a system, a service, a product that will actually enhance the way that teaching is happening or make that solution better, then that can be a really wonderful way to go about these types of projects. So, really just to conclude, the result of a socially responsible satisfying people rather than satisfying customers. So in a sense, we are seeing the people, the users in these communities as our customer in a business sort of sense. Socially responsible design means looking at the big picture, so looking at the context around the person, what technologies do they have, what skills do they already have, what things are they already doing that design could really help solve the problem. I think that a local focus is incredibly important because this puts people in the centre of the process. And then I think you need to understand your user and their context on a deep level. So you might need to use multiple techniques to actually resolve and understand your problem and to make a really good solution. And that might mean that you need to do this over and over again. The first solution may not be the right solution, so you have to be prepared to keep working at that solution. So thank you for listening. So we have about 40 minutes, yeah? Roughly 40 minutes, okay. So I have something for you to do. Don't look worried. It will be fine. So, what I want you to do is, does everyone remember where they went yesterday? The first session, when you went yesterday, whether you visit the potter, the broom maker, the garbage dump, street vendor, the village or the slums, yeah? Okay. Can we sit together in these groups? So can we have the potter, not the potters, the pottery people here? And maybe we will have the broom making people in the middle here. So we can sit together. So when you went on your first visit, yeah, so potters can go up in front of you, yeah? Team to come to the front and just explain one social innovation they saw in the village. So you need to explain with a face-to-face one innovation that you saw. So we just 1 minute choose a person